The holographic display was a spiderweb of cold, blue light, etching trade routes and resource allocations into the air of the council chamber. Each glowing line was a world, a civilization, a billion lives reduced to a logistical equation. Queen Thera rested her chin on a hand that felt as heavy as lead, her violet eyes tracking the data with a practiced, bone-deep disinterest. 300 years. The number echoed in the silent, hollow places of her mind. 3 centuries of this. 300 years of listening to Administrator Kelvin drone on about grain shipments and mineral quotas, his voice a steady, nasal hum that made the ancient crystal of her throne feel like it was vibrating in sympathy. He spoke as if the fate of civilization hinged on whether Colony 79 received their fertilizer allotment on schedule, and Thera often found herself wondering, in a detached, weary way, if perhaps it did. Perhaps the entire grand, teetering edifice of the Celestine Empire was propped up by such mundane, tedious concerns. Your Majesty, Kelvin's voice cut through her reverie, his long, elegant ears twitching with a hint of anxiety. If we could redirect the cargo vessels from the outer rim, we could shave 3 solar days off the delivery to the Kepler belt. Do it, Thera said. The words were not born of strategic agreement, but of a simple, desperate calculus. Agreeing made meetings end faster. Kelvin blinked, his large, liquid eyes widening. Just do it, without committee review. A sigh, soft as moth wings, escaped Thera's lips. Kelvin, I have attended, by my best estimate, 4,000 trade conferences. Perhaps 5. I've lost count. If I cannot trust my own judgment on moving a few ships around a star chart, then what, precisely, have I been doing for the last 3 centuries? A ripple of uncomfortable laughter, thin and brittle, moved through the assembled advisors. They never quite knew how to respond when she got like this. When the immense, crushing weight of immortality made her flippant instead of wise. They wanted a goddess of statecraft, serene and infallible. Sometimes, she could only manage the weary cynicism of a bureaucrat who had seen it all 1,000 times over. The meeting dragged on, a river of words flowing around her. Thera let her mind drift, a dangerous habit she'd cultivated over the decades. It wandered to places she had trained it, with the rigid discipline of a soldier, not to go. It slipped through the years, past the parades and the treaties, past the cold sleep of interstellar travel and the heated debates of council, and settled, with the cruel precision of a scalpel, in a sterile medical wing 20 years past. The air there had smelled of antiseptic and despair. Physicians with grave faces and voices softened with pity. Irreversible damage, Your Majesty. The radiation exposure during the Cathare War. Princess Sariah's reproductive system. There is no way to. The lead physician, a man she had known since he was a student, had looked at the floor, unable to meet her gaze. We are so very, very sorry. She had held her daughter then. Sariah, her Sariah, who had the same silver hair and a laugh that could light up the palace's deepest vaults, had crumpled in her arms. Thera had felt the sobs racking her daughter's slender frame, each one a tremor in Thera's own soul. She had held her, this woman who had conquered star systems, negotiated peace between ancient enemies, and survived countless assassination attempts, and she had had no words of comfort. There were no words. What could you possibly say to someone who had just had their most fundamental dreams, the quiet, personal future they had cherished, incinerated before their eyes? What empire, what throne, what power could possibly fix that, Your Majesty? Thera surfaced from the memory with a jolt, the phantom scent of antiseptic replaced by the cool, recycled air of the council chamber. The entire table was staring at her. Commander Thex, her military advisor, his face a roadmap of old scars and older loyalties, cleared his throat gently. The matter of the frontier negotiations. You depart tomorrow. Tomorrow. For a dizzying second, the word meant nothing. Then the gears of duty and routine engaged. Right, she said, straightening in her throne, a magnificent, intimidating piece of furniture carved from a single piece of asteroid gemstone that, for all its beauty, always made her lower back ache. Brief me on the route. Thex activated the star map. A ribbon of pale blue light blazed across the display, threading its way through the friendly, pacified systems of the core toward the volatile, disputed frontier. Standard diplomatic corridor, Your Majesty. 14 days travel, accounting for the ceremonial stops. We will pass through the Kepler Belt colonies on day 7. Something tightened in Thera's chest, a faint, hopeful flutter she immediately tried to quash. Which colonies, specifically? Thex consulted his data pad, his brow furrowed. Colony designated New Horizon. Small settlement, mostly agricultural and mining. Nothing of strategic importance. New Horizon. The name landed in the quiet room with the force of a physical blow. New Horizon, where Sariah had fled 5 years ago, claiming she needed solitude, space, distance from the palace and its pitying glances to heal. 5 years of sporadic, carefully worded messages. 5 years of, "I'm fine, Mother." Truly. 5 years of, "Please, don't visit. I need to do this alone." 5 years of Thera respecting boundaries that felt less like healthy separation and more like a wall being built, brick by painful brick, between them. "We'll stop there," Thera announced, her voice betraying none of the sudden, frantic beating of her heart. "Add it to the itinerary." "Your Majesty," Thex began, his tone cautious, "there's no diplomatic necessity. Their output is negligible. The security logistics alone. Then consider it a morale visit," Thera interrupted, summoning a smile she had perfected over centuries, the one that was warm enough to be convincing but held a steel core that brooked no argument. "The people of the frontier deserve to see their empress occasionally, don't they? Remind them they are not forgotten." Thex nodded, making a note on his data pad. The meeting concluded with the usual formalities, the bowing and the murmured honorifics. Thera swept from the chamber, her honor guard falling into step behind her, their polished armor clicking in perfect unison, a sound as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. In her private quarters, high in the central spire, she dismissed the guards with a wave of her hand. The silence that descended was profound, broken only by the almost imperceptible hum of the city below. She stood before the floor-to-ceiling crystalflex windows, looking out at the heart of her empire. The capital city stretched away in a breathtaking panorama of crystalline towers and soaring transport lanes, glowing against a perpetual twilight sky. 200 worlds looked to this city, to this very spire, for leadership. And somewhere out there, past all the light and the order and the carefully managed commerce, her daughter was living a life Thera knew nothing about. With a gesture that was almost a prayer, she pulled up Sariah's last message on her personal display. A brief video. Her daughter's face appeared, beautiful and composed, the sharp edges of her grief seemingly softened by time and distance. "Everything's well, Mother," Sariah's recorded voice said, calm and even. "The colony is peaceful. The air is clean. I'm finding purpose in the gardens here. Please don't worry." The same reassurances, slightly reworded, that she had been sending for 5 years. Thera froze the image, studying her daughter's face, the set of her mouth, the light in her eyes. Was that genuine peace she saw there? Or was it a carefully maintained performance, a mask worn for the camera? She couldn't tell anymore. The distance between them had stretched from mere light years into a chasm of the heart, something far harder to measure and infinitely more painful to cross. "Your Majesty." Her personal aide, Mayin, appeared in the doorway, his presence as quiet and efficient as always. "The departure roster for tomorrow," he said, offering a data slate. "You'll want to review the final manifest. Include civilian clothes in my luggage, Mayin." Mayin's usually impassive face flickered with confusion. "Civilian clothes, Your Majesty. Something simple, functional, nothing that screams, visiting monarch." Thera turned from the window, her expression leaving no room for debate. "I'm making a personal stop on this trip. Unannounced. I'd rather not arrive at New Horizon with the full imperial fanfare." Understanding dawned on Mayin's face, followed by a quickly suppressed flicker of concern. "The princess?" She asked not to be disturbed. "Princess Sariah is my daughter." Thera's voice was low, but it carried the unyielding steel that had held an empire together through war and peace. "And 5 years is long enough. I need to see her, Mayin. Not a hologram, not a message. I need to see her with my own eyes. I need to know she is truly all right, not just the edited version she sends to placate me." Mayin bowed his head. "Of course, Your Majesty. It will be done." That night, sleep was a fugitive. Thera lay in her vast bed, the sheets woven from moon silk that was softer than cloud, and stared at the ceiling where a master artist had painted the constellations as they were from Celestis, her birthworld. She traced the familiar patterns, the silver swan, the warrior's helm, and wondered what she would find on New Horizon. Would Sariah be angry at the intrusion? Would she be the hollow, grief-stricken girl who had left, or had solitude transformed her into someone Thera would no longer recognize? The quantum clock by her bed cycled silently through the hours. At some point, exhaustion, a heavier weight than any crown, finally claimed her, and she dreamed. Not of empires or star charts, but of a small child with a cascade of silver hair, laughing uncontrollably as Thera, young and unburdened, pushed her on a swing in the palace gardens. A time before the war, before the radiation, before the world, in all its complexity, had broken. Blank, underscore, blank. The transport shuttle deposited Sariah on the edge of New Horizon Colony with a finality that felt like a slammed door. The pilot, a grizzled human man with a face like worn leather and eyes that had seen enough fleeing royalty to know better than to ask questions, had simply given her a curt nod before the hatch sealed. The engines whined to life, and the ship lifted off in a storm of red dust, leaving her standing alone with 2 travel cases and a desperate, clawing determination to disappear. New Horizon wasn't much to look at. It was a collection of prefabricated structures, white and boxy, clustered around a central communal hub like chicks huddling for warmth. Skeletal solar collectors stretched their metallic fingers toward a sun that burned with a fierce, white intensity in a pale, thin sky. Everything had the temporary, utilitarian look of a frontier settlement, as if the entire colony was just passing through and might pack up and leave tomorrow. It was perfect. She rented a small dwelling on the colony's outskirts from a Tovan landlord who accepted her payment, in untraceable currency, without bothering to scrutinize her forged credentials too closely. The house was a humble, 3-room box with a water recycler that groaned like a dying animal and windows that didn't quite seal against the ever-present red dust. She loved it immediately. There were no servants, no protocol officers, no courtiers watching her every move with a mixture of deference and pity in their eyes. The silence was her own. The dust was her own. The first month passed in a blur of blessed anonymity. She learned that most colonists were too preoccupied with the daily business of survival, mending hydroponic relays, patching dome seals, trading for spare parts, to care about the intricacies of Celestine politics. She bought food at the open-air market, struggling with the unfamiliar currency. She battled with the primitive cooking equipment in her small kitchen, burning simple meals more often than she cared to admit. And her garden was a catastrophe. She had approached it with the same methodical precision she'd once applied to fleet deployments. She'd read the data pads, measured the plots, planted the seeds at the recommended depth, and followed the watering schedule to the letter. The result was a patch of mud containing a few withered, brown stalks that looked more like casualties of war than future food. She was on her knees, glaring at a particularly pathetic row of what were supposed to be 2 brutes, when a voice, warm and laced with amusement, came from over the fence. "Honey, those are dead." Sariah looked up. Her neighbor, a human woman named Sarah with kind eyes set in a weather-beaten face and hair the color of iron, was leaning on the fence, shaking her head. "I had noticed," Sariah muttered, wiping a muddy hand across her brow, only succeeding in making more of a mess. "You know, there's a clinic in town. Doc James could probably do something about that hand." Sariah looked down. She'd sliced her palm open on the sharp edge of a broken planter hours ago. Blood had welled and dried, mixing with the dark soil. In her frustration, she hadn't even felt it. "It's fine." "It's not fine. It needs sealing." "Come on." Sarah was already opening the rickety gate, her movements brisk and purposeful. She took Sariah's uninjured arm and pulled her to her feet with a strength that belied her age and size. The clinic was a converted storage unit near the colony's main square, marked by a simple, hand-painted sign. Inside, it was cramped but meticulously organized. Shelves were lined with medical supplies labeled in 3 different languages. A portable bioscanner hummed quietly in the corner, its lights blinking in a steady, reassuring rhythm. A man looked up from a data pad as they entered. He was human, with dark hair that was slightly too long and fell across his forehead, and eyes the color of rich soil. Sariah's first, unbidden thought was that they were kind eyes. Her second, more practiced thought, was a sharp reminder that she shouldn't be noticing anyone's eyes at all. "Gardening accident," Sarah announced, propelling Sariah forward like a wayward freighter. The man's lips quirked into a small smile. "Let me guess," he said, setting the data pad aside and moving to examine her hand. His touch was gentle, professional. "You planted everything too deep and overwatered them. Classic mistake. Now you're angry at the plants for dying, and you've wounded yourself in the conflict." Despite herself, Sariah let out a short, surprised laugh. It was a rusty sound, unfamiliar in her own ears. "How did you know?" "Because everyone who moves here from the inner systems makes the same mistake. You're used to automated agriculture. Real dirt. It doesn't come with instructions." He cleaned the wound with a practiced efficiency. "I'm James, by the way. Local medic, amateur horticulturist, and apparently the only person in this colony who can keep a plant alive." "Sariah," she said, the false name feeling strange on her tongue. "Nice to meet you, Sariah. This is going to sting a little." He wasn't lying. The tissue sealant burned with a sharp, cleansing fire, and Sariah hissed through her teeth. James kept talking, his voice a calm, steady counterpoint to the pain. "The trick with frontier gardening is to plant shallow and water less. The soil here retains moisture better than you'd think. Also, those seeds you bought at Kalen's stall, they're for experienced growers. You want the idiot-proof variety from Hansen's stall on the east side." Idiot-proof. His words, not mine. "Though between you and me, they really are nearly impossible to kill." He finished sealing the wound and stepped back. "They're good as new. Try not to declare war on any more vegetables for a few days, all right?" Sariah found herself smiling, a genuine, uncalculated smile that felt foreign on her face. "Thank you, Doctor. James is fine, and no charge for first-time gardening casualties. Consider it my contribution to colony morale." She left the clinic with instructions for wound care and, inexplicably, detailed directions to Hansen's stall. 3 days later, when the sealant itched unbearably, she found herself walking back to the clinic, ostensibly to have him check the healing process. James took one look at her hand and a slow grin spread across his face. "It's fine. You just wanted gardening advice." "I did not," she protested, feeling a flush creep up her neck. "You absolutely did," he laughed, A warm, rich sound. Come on. I'm due for a break anyway. I'll show you what you're doing wrong. They ended up back in her garden, James kneeling in the red dirt without a second thought, explaining soil composition and drainage while Sariah tried to focus on his words instead of the easy, confident way he moved, or the patient humor in his voice. He replanted an entire row of seeds, talking about Terran agricultural history, about how humans had been coaxing life from the soil for thousands of years before they ever dreamed of reaching the stars. Your people have starship drives that can fold space-time, he said, patting the soil gently around a seedling. But humans, we've been selectively breeding plants since before we invented the wheel. It's basically our cultural superpower. Growing vegetables is your superpower? Sariah asked, unable to keep the amusement from her voice. Mock all you want. Let's see who's eating fresh produce in 2 months and who's still chewing on recycled protein paste. He came back a week later to check on the garden's progress. Then 2 weeks after that, somewhere in the intervals between his visits, between the discussions of pH levels and companion planting, Sariah realized she was watching for him. She found herself inventing reasons to stop by the clinic, a fabricated ache, a question about the colony's water quality. They began to talk about things that had nothing to do with horticulture. James told her about growing up on Earth, about choosing the unpredictable challenge of frontier medicine over a comfortable, well-funded practice in the inner systems. She, in turn, told him about loss, about a grief so profound it felt like a physical amputation. About feeling broken in ways that no physician, no matter how skilled, could ever fix. She spoke in vague terms, careful to avoid the specifics of her identity, but the emotion was raw and true. 4 months after her arrival, they were sitting on her small porch, watching the colony's lights begin to wink on as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and orange. The air was cool, carrying the scent of dust and the faint, sweet smell of the now thriving night-blooming flowers in her garden. "You don't talk like a colonist," James said, his voice quiet. Sariah's heart stuttered in her chest. "What do you mean? Your syntax, your vocabulary, the way you carry yourself. You're educated, highly, probably inner system, maybe even capital world." He wasn't looking at her, his gaze fixed on the darkening skyline. "I'm not asking. Everyone here is running from something. I wanted you to know that I've noticed. And I don't care." She should have left it there. Should have thanked him for his discretion and changed the subject. It was the safe thing to do, the smart thing. But the silence between them felt like a confession waiting to happen. The kindness in his voice, the simple acceptance he offered, was a siren's call she was too weary to resist. What if who I am, what I was, would change everything? She whispered, the words barely audible. "Then don't tell me." He finally turned to face her, his expression serious in the twilight. "Tell me when you're ready. Or don't tell me at all. I like the Sariah who burns dinner and argues with seedlings. That's enough for me." But it wasn't enough. Not for her. Not anymore. The wall she had built around herself was cracking, and the truth was a flood she could no longer hold back. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the air cold in her lungs, and spoke the words she had been carrying alone for so long. "My name is Sariah," she said, her voice trembling. "Princess Sariah, heir to the Celestine throne. And I left because I am barren, and I couldn't stand to watch my mother look at me with pity in her eyes for one more day." The silence that followed was absolute. It stretched between them, thin and taut. Sariah's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage of bone. She watched his face, waiting for the shift, for the distance, for the deference that would shatter this fragile thing they had built. James was quiet for a long moment, his profile silhouetted against the dying light. Then he said, "Okay. Okay." She echoed, disbelief making her voice sharp. "That's it." He turned back to her, and in the dim light, she could see the same calm acceptance in his eyes. "What else is there? You're still the person who declared war on a bunch of defenseless vegetables. The title doesn't change that." The relief that washed over her was so profound it left her dizzy. She hadn't realized how heavy the secret had been until the weight was gone. She started to laugh, a shaky, tear-filled sound, and James reached out, his hand covering hers, his grip warm and solid and real. Blank, underscore, blank. James showed up at her door 3 days later, his arms laden with a stack of data pads, his eyes shadowed with fatigue but burning with a fierce, determined light. "I need you to hear me out," he said, not waiting for an invitation as he brushed past her into the small living room. "I mean really hear me, Sariah. Not just dismiss it out of hand because you've already decided it's impossible." Sariah closed the door, her heart doing a complicated, painful somersault in her chest. "James, what is all this? Human fertility medicine." He spread the data pads across her low table, each one displaying dense medical journals, complex research papers, and annotated case studies. "We've been working on this for centuries. Long before we had starships, we were figuring out how to help people have children when their own biology said they couldn't. James, I know what your physicians told you. I know the radiation damage is supposed to be irreversible by Celestine medical standards. But our genetics, they aren't that different. Similar enough that we can interbreed, which means similar enough that some of our treatments, they might work." He pulled up a holographic display, showing side-by-side genetic sequences that were a meaningless swirl of color and light to Sariah. "Look, I'm not a specialist in this field. I'm a frontier medic, but I know people who are. There are doctors on Earth, in the Martian bio-labs, who've treated hybrid couples. They understand both physiologies." Sariah sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "You've been researching this," she whispered. "For 3 days straight. My patients are very annoyed with me," he admitted with a wry, tired smile. I thought you shouldn't have to accept one verdict. Not when there might be other options you haven't even had a chance to explore. You've seen the best physicians in the Empire. The best Celestine physicians. They're brilliant, but they don't have 300 years of dedicated human reproductive medicine behind them. He sat across from her, his hands spread flat on the table as if trying to physically impart his conviction. I'm not saying it will work. The odds are probably terrible. But terrible odds are better than no odds at all, aren't they? She wanted to tell him to stop. That hope was a more exquisite torture than acceptance. That she had already done the hard work of grieving, of packing that dream away in a locked box and bury it deep. Except she hadn't. She had run away and called it healing. Even if it were possible, she said, her voice thin, the procedures would be expensive. Invasive. Probably painful. Yes, he said, his voice gentle but unwavering. I won't lie to you about that. It would be all of those things. But Sariah, you told me you wanted children. That it was your dream. Don't you think you owe it to yourself to try everything before you give up on that dream forever? The words hung in the air between them, fragile and terrifying. Outside, the normal sounds of the colony continued, someone's music system blaring a tinny pop song, the distant roar of a transport shuttle. A perfectly ordinary evening, and yet the axis of her world was tilting. Why? She asked, the question a raw scrape in her throat. Why would you do this? Spend 3 days researching, losing sleep, for someone you've known for 4 months. James met her gaze, his own eyes full of a truth he made no attempt to hide. Because I'm falling in love with you, he said simply. And I want you to have everything you've ever wanted. Even if it's not with me. The confession should have terrified her. It should have sent her scrambling for the door, back to the safety of her isolated grief. Instead, it cracked something open inside her chest. A dam of ice giving way to a torrent of feelings she thought had been scorched out of her long ago. You're an idiot, she whispered, her vision blurring with tears. Probably, he agreed, a small, hopeful smile touching his lips. Are you going to let me set up a consultation or not? Blank, blank. The human doctors worked out of a small, unassuming medical facility in the next colony over, a 2-hour shuttle ride through terrain so rugged it made Sariah's stomach lurch. James held her hand the entire way, his thumb tracing slow, calming circles on her skin as he told terrible jokes about frontier medicine that made her laugh despite the knot of anxiety in her gut. Dr. Yuki Chen was a compact woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a tongue that could probably slice through durasteel. She reviewed Sariah's medical files with a speed that was almost dismissive, her expression unreadable. Your physicians weren't wrong about the damage, she said finally, setting the data pad down with a definitive click. The radiation scarring is extensive. The endometrial lining is, well, it's a mess. By conventional Celestine standards, it's hopeless. I didn't say that. Yuki pulled up a holographic genetic map, her fingers dancing through the light to highlight specific pathways. I said they weren't wrong. Celestine reproductive systems are remarkably similar to human ones, but there are key differences in how your body regulates hormonal production. The radiation didn't just cause physical scarring, it disrupted those regulatory pathways. Your physicians tried to repair the damage directly. We're going to try to bypass it entirely." What followed was a barrage of medical terminology that Sariah only half understood. Hormone therapy to essentially reboot her system. Genetic scaffolding to support cellular regeneration. Advanced techniques using specially adapted human stem cells to encourage the growth of new, healthy tissue. Yuki spoke with the blunt confidence of someone who had pushed the boundaries of the possible before, but she was also brutally, refreshingly honest. Best case scenario. Maybe a 20% chance of successful conception. And that's after months of treatment that is going to make you feel terrible. The hormone injections will make you nauseous, irritable, and exhausted. The cellular regeneration sessions are uncomfortable. Yuki leaned back in her chair, her gaze direct and unflinching. "I don't sugarcoat things, Your Highness. This is going to be hard. It's going to be expensive. And it will probably break your heart. So I'll ask you once. Are you sure you want to try?" Sariah looked at James. He squeezed her hand, a silent communication that passed between them. "Your choice. I'm here." This was her risk to take. Her mountain to climb. She thought of the empty nursery in the palace, of the hollow ache that had lived in her chest for years, and then she thought of James's face when he'd said, "Terrible odds are better than no odds at all." She turned back to Dr. Chen, her back straight, her voice clear and steady. "When do we start?" The treatments were exactly as awful as promised. The hormone injections left her nauseated and swinging between despair and rage. The cellular regeneration sessions felt like a low-grade fever dream, leaving her drained and fragile for days afterward. James stayed with her through all of it. He held her hair back when she was sick, made her laugh with ridiculous stories when she wanted to quit, and never once, not even in her darkest moments, suggested she was being unreasonable or that the cost was too high. Somewhere between the third treatment cycle and the fourth, in the quiet, exhausted space between the pain and the hope, they stopped pretending this was just a friendship born of shared hardship. He kissed her for the first time in her garden, surrounded by the thriving, green life they had nurtured together. The air was sweet with the scent of blooming night flowers, and the twin moons of New Horizon hung like pendants in the sky above. Sariah kissed him back with a desperate, hungry fervor, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer as if she could fuse their two lonely souls into one unbreakable whole. "This is crazy," she whispered against his mouth, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "I'm a princess. You're a frontier medic. This violates about 7 different imperial protocols. Good thing we're on the frontier." Then, he murmured, his lips tracing a path along her jaw. "Protocol doesn't reach this far." He pulled back just enough to look at her, his eyes serious in the moonlight. "Marry me." Sariah stared at him. "You can't be serious. Completely serious. Marry me. No ceremony. No politics. No imperial seal. Just us. If this works, if we get our miracle, I want those children to have both their parents. And if it doesn't work," he added, his voice softening, I still want to spend every single day for the rest of my life arguing with you about vegetable placement." She should have said no. She should have explained about succession laws and bloodline purity and the 1,000 reasons why a union between the heir apparent and a commoner, a human, was an impossibility that could shake the very foundations of the empire. Instead, she looked at this man who had seen her at her most broken, who had offered her not pity but partnership, who had given her back the courage to hope, and she knew, with a certainty that went deeper than duty or title, what her answer was. "Yes," she said, and then she laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. Yes. They were married in her garden on a spring morning, with Sarah and 2 other neighbors as their witnesses. There was no priest, no formal vows written on parchment. They spoke their own promises, simple words about loyalty and love and building a life together, their voices quiet but sure in the clean morning air. James slipped a simple, polished band of New Horizon ironwood onto her finger, and Sariah felt something she had thought was dead forever stir back to life within her. It was hope, fragile and fierce, taking root in the fertile ground of a love she had never dared to imagine. Blank, underscore, blank. 3 months later, the calm in their small home chimed. It was Dr. Yuki Chen. Her face on the display was as impassive as ever, but there was a tiny, almost imperceptible softening around her eyes. "The results are in," she said without preamble. "Against all odds and every shred of medical common sense I possess, you're pregnant." Sariah's hand flew to her mouth. The data pad she'd been holding clattered to the floor. The world tilted, the sounds of the colony fading into a distant hum. James, who had been reading nearby, was at her side in an instant, his arm around her waist as her knees buckled. "It's positive," Sariah whispered, the words a prayer. She said, "I'm pregnant." James didn't speak. He just held her, his own body trembling against hers, and they stood there in the middle of their small living room, crying and laughing and clinging to each other, unable to believe the impossible had somehow become real. Their daughter was born on a morning when the colony's primary power grid chose to fail, plunging the medical bay into emergency lighting. James, by the glow of lanterns, delivered his own child, his hand steady and sure as he guided their daughter into the world. Lyra came into their lives not with a whimper, but with a furious, indignant cry that seemed to shake the very walls of the clinic. Her hair was a damp, dark cap that would soon lighten to the distinctive silver of the Celestine line, and when she opened her eyes, blinking in the lantern light, they were the same deep, brilliant violet as her mother's. Sariah held her, this tiny, perfect, impossible creature, and sobbed so hard she could barely breathe. "She's real," she kept repeating, her tears falling on the blanket wrapped around her daughter. "James, she's real, she's perfect," James corrected, his own face wet as he leaned down to kiss Sariah's forehead, then Lyra's. "You're both perfect. Blank, underscore, blank." Cale had discovered that kitchen chairs, when stacked with sufficient toddler determination, could become a ladder to the upper cabinets. This was a significant problem, as the upper cabinets contained things that 2-year-olds should absolutely not have access to, including a jar of preserved Terran peaches that he had decided looked particularly delicious. Kale. No. Sariah waddled across the kitchen as fast as her enormously pregnant body would allow, which was not very fast at all. Those chairs are not a climbing structure. Her son looked down at her from his precarious tower, a grin of pure, unadulterated triumph on his face. He had James's dark, expressive eyes and a stubbornness that was all his own. He reached a chubby hand for the cabinet handle. "I help," Lyra announced, dragging a fourth chair toward the growing tower with the grim determination of a junior engineer. "You are not helping, sweetheart. You're enabling," Sariah said, trying to catch her breath, one hand pressed to the small of her back. 8 months pregnant with their third child, and she had somehow forgotten just how exhaustingly inventive toddlers could be. "James, your son is attempting structural engineering again." "Our son," James called from the other room, laughter rich in his voice. "He's only mine when he's causing chaos." "He's always causing chaos." James appeared in the doorway, took one look at the situation, and bit back a smile. "All right, buddy, we talked about this. Chairs are for sitting. That jar is on a high shelf for a very good reason." He lifted Kale from his tower with practiced ease, setting him firmly on the floor. "How about we make a deal? You help me dismantle your engineering project, and I'll get the peaches down for everyone." "Fair." Kale considered this with the grave seriousness of a galactic diplomat. "Purple ones," he bargained. "With the purple ones," James agreed solemnly. Crisis averted. Sariah sank into a chair that was, for the moment, not part of a tower, and watched her husband and children work together to restore order. This was her life now. This beautiful, chaotic, sticky-handed, negotiation-filled domesticity. Lyra, with her silver hair perpetually escaping its braids, her serious violet eyes that missed nothing. Kale, a whirlwind of energy and mischief with his father's smile. And the new life growing within her, a constant, gentle reminder of the miracles they had been granted. Lyra climbed into her lap, or what remained of it. "Mama," she asked, her small fingers tracing the shape of Sariah's swollen belly, "when does the baby come out?" "Soon, little star, very soon. Will it play with me?" "Eventually. At first, babies mostly just sleep and eat and cry. You'll have to be very patient with it." "I'm good at patient," Lyra announced, which was an optimistic, if not entirely accurate, interpretation of reality. After the peaches were distributed and the chairs returned to their proper, earthbound function, James joined Sariah at the table while the children played with building blocks in the living room. "You got another message from your mother today," he said quietly. Sariah's stomach clenched, a reaction that had nothing to do with pregnancy. "What did it say?" "The same as always. Checking in. Asking how you are. Hoping you're well." James took her hand, his thumb stroking over the simple ironwood band on her finger. "Sariah, it's been 5 years. We have 3 children. When are you going to tell her?" "I will. I am." She stared at their joined hands. His, calloused from work at the clinic and in the garden. Hers, bearing the faint scars of her early, clumsy attempts at frontier life. I sent a message last week, asking her to visit. In 4 weeks. I'm going to tell her everything, James. I need a little more time to prepare. Love, you've been preparing for 2 years, he said, his voice gentle but firm. You're terrified. I know you are. Not that she'll reject them. I know your mother, even just from your stories, and I know she'll fall in love with them the moment she sees them. You're terrified. She'll claim them for the empire. That Lyra will be groomed as the next heir from the cradle. That they'll be dragged into palace politics before they're old enough to understand what it means. You want them to have childhoods. Real ones. Sariah looked up at him, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. As that's so wrong. I want them to have what you had. What I never did. My childhood involved a lot of moving around and eating recycled protein paste. I'm not sure it's the idyllic standard you're imagining. He squeezed her hand. But your point is taken. And it's valid. Your mother deserves to know she has grandchildren. And he nodded toward the living room, where Lyra was patiently showing Kale how to stack blocks without toppling them. They deserve to know their grandmother. The real her, not just the empress from the news feeds. I know, Sariah whispered, her gaze fixed on their children. I do know that. 4 more weeks. Then I'll tell her everything. I promise. The days that followed had a peculiar, suspended quality, as if time itself was holding its breath. Sariah composed and deleted a dozen messages to her mother, trying to find words that were adequate for, surprise, you're a grandmother 3 times over. Nothing felt right. How did you explain 5 years of silence? 5 years of letting someone believe you were alone and childless, when all the while you had been building a family, a home, a life brimming with love. Mira was born on a Tuesday afternoon, arriving with considerably less drama than her siblings and a healthy, impressive set of lungs that announced her presence to the entire colony. James delivered her in their own bedroom, his hands as steady as they had been with Lyra, while Lyra and Kale waited with Sarah next door. When they brought the children in to meet their new sister, Lyra's eyes went wide with awe. She's so small, she breathed. You were this small once, Sariah said, exhausted and exhilarated all at once. Both of you were. Kale reached out a tentative finger and poked Mira's tiny, curled fist. Squishy, he declared. Be gentle with your sister, please, James said, ruffling his son's hair. Over the next week, Sariah adjusted to the beautiful, overwhelming chaos of life with 3 children under 5, which felt less like parenting and more like a continuous, high-stakes exercise in logistics and crisis management. James took extra shifts at the clinic to afford the things they needed, and Sariah learned to function on 2 hours of sleep while keeping a newborn fed and 2 energetic toddlers from accidentally destroying themselves or each other. She was covered in flour, the result of an incident involving Lyra's attempts at baking, and Kale's firm belief that more ingredients always improved a recipe. When the door sensor chimed, James was at the clinic. Sarah was off-world visiting family. Sariah wiped her hands on her apron, adjusted the sleeping mirror in the wrap against her chest, and went to answer, expecting a neighbor or a supply delivery. She opened the door, and the world stopped. Queen Thera stood on her doorstep, dressed in simple, civilian clothes of dark gray that did nothing to diminish her regal bearing. She was flanked by two of her honor guards, who looked profoundly uncomfortable in the modest surroundings. Behind her mother, Sariah could see the sleek, menacing lines of a diplomatic transport parked on the dusty road, its polished hull absurdly out of place among the colony's rugged, practical vehicles. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, neither of them moved. Thera stared at her daughter, her eyes taking in the flower-dusting Sariah's hair, the sleeping infant nestled against her chest, the obvious, undeniable signs of a vibrant, domestic life. Sariah stared back, her mind a perfect, blank white panic. All her carefully prepared speeches, all her planned revelations, evaporated into the dust-filled air. "Mother," she finally managed, her voice cracking. "You're early. You weren't supposed to." From inside the house came a crash, followed by Kale's voice shouting, "I'm okay." And Lyra's responding cry of, "Mama." Kale broke the thing. Sariah closed her eyes. This was not how it was supposed to happen. None of it. She took a shaky breath and opened her eyes, meeting her mother's stunned, uncomprehending gaze. You should come inside." Thera stepped across the threshold into a world she could never have imagined. The small living room was a riot of color and life. Children's drawings, vibrant and chaotic, were taped to the walls. Toys were scattered across the floor. Building blocks, a stuffed animal that might have been a bear or possibly an alien life form, a toy spacecraft missing one wing. The air smelled of baking bread and something sweet, a homely, domestic scent that made Thera's chest ache with a strange, sharp longing. Two children stood frozen in the middle of the room, staring at the strangers. The older one, a girl, had a waterfall of silver hair and eyes that were unmistakably, heart-stoppingly Celestine. She held the pieces of a broken vase, her small face a mask of guilt and curiosity. The younger, a boy with darker hair and features that spoke of a blended heritage, had his arms crossed in a defensive, challenging posture. "I didn't mean to," the girl said, her voice small and worried. Sariah moved past Thera, her movements automatic. "It's all right, Lyra. Just stay away from the pieces. Kale, go get your father, please." The boy didn't move. His eyes, dark and intelligent, were locked on Thera. "Who is she?" "Someone very important. Please, Kale, now." The child turned and ran from the room, his small feet pounding on the floorboards. Lyra remained, watching Thera with an unblinking, fascinated curiosity. Thera could not speak. She could not form a single coherent thought. Her mind, usually a precision instrument capable of navigating the most complex political landscapes, had simply shut down. This child, this girl, she had her daughter's face. Her granddaughter. The word felt alien, impossible, a mythical concept that had no place in her reality. "You look like Mama," Lyra observed, her head tilted. "But older. Are you sick? You're very pale. Lyra. That's not polite, Sariah said, but her voice was trembling. Thera found her voice, but it was a thin, broken thing, barely a whisper. This is impossible. She gestured helplessly at the children, at the room, at everything. My daughter was. The physicians confirmed it. Irreversible. You can't have children. Mother, please. Sariah's eyes were filled with tears, her composure finally shattering. I need you to listen. I need you to let me explain. Explain what? Thera's voice rose, sharp with a pain she could no longer contain. 5 years, Sariah. 5 years you let me believe you were alone out here, suffering. I thought you were grieving. I thought you needed solitude to heal. And all this time you were building a life. Yes, Sariah's chin lifted, that familiar, stubborn tilt Thera remembered from her childhood. This is my life. These are my children. Our children. Lyra, Kale, and Mira. She touched the sleeping infant's head. Your grandchildren. The word hung in the air between them, vast and silent. Grandchildren. Thera had stopped allowing herself to imagine this possibility so long ago that the word itself felt like a foreign language, one she had forgotten how to speak. Her legs felt suddenly unreliable, the strength draining from them. One of her guards took a step forward, his face etched with concern, but she waved him back with a jerky motion. I don't understand, she whispered, her gaze moving from Lyra's curious face to the infant in Sariah's arms. How is this possible? It was then that the door burst open and a human man rushed in, followed by the boy, Kale. The man, James, took in the scene in an instant. Thera and her guards, Sariah's stricken expression, the children's confusion. His face went through several complicated emotions: shock, fear, protectiveness, before settling into a calm, weary resignation. Your Majesty, he said, moving to stand beside Sariah, his hand finding and holding hers in a gesture of pure, unshakable solidarity. I'm James, Sariah's husband. Husband. The word landed like a physical blow. Thera's eyes dropped to her daughter's hand, saw the simple, worn band of dark wood there. How had she missed it? How had she missed all of this? This is impossible, Thera repeated, the mantra of her shock. She looked at James, really looked at him. He was not what she would have expected for her daughter. No title, no wealth, no political connections. But he stood beside Sariah not as a subject before his queen, but as an equal, a partner. His eyes met hers without fear, only a steady, watchful caution. My daughter was barren. Human fertility medicine, James said, his voice calm and clear. We have techniques that Celestine physicians haven't developed. The genetic compatibility between our species, it meant that treatments designed for humans could be adapted for Sariah. You're saying human doctors succeeded where the best physicians in my empire failed. Thera's voice was thin with disbelief. Not failed, James corrected gently. They just didn't have the same tools. It wasn't easy. The odds were terrible, but Lyra was born 2 years after we married. Then Kale. Then Mira. He looked at Sariah, and the love in his eyes was so raw and open that Thera had to look away. 3 miracles that we never expected. Lyra, tired of the adult tension, tugged on Thera's sleeve, forcing the queen's attention downward. The child looked up at her with eyes that seemed to see straight into the core of her. "Are you our grandmother?" she asked. "Mama talks about you sometimes. She says you're very important and that she misses you." The simple, innocent statement broke the last of Thera's composure. The wall of shock and anger crumbled, and what lay behind it was a vast, aching tenderness she had not felt in centuries. She dropped to her knees, heedless of the dignity of her position, of the guards, of anything, and pulled the child into her arms. Lyra came willingly, her small, warm arms wrapping around Thera's neck. "You're real," Thera breathed into her granddaughter's silver hair, her voice breaking on a sob. "You're all real." Cale approached cautiously, studying the strange woman who was crying while hugging his sister. "Why are you sad?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "Mama says crying means you're sad." "I'm not sad, little one," Thera said, her voice thick with tears as she reached out and drew him into the embrace. He was sturdier than Lyra, a solid, warm weight in her arms. I'm many things. But sad isn't one of them." Sariah sank to the floor beside her mother, Mira still sleeping peacefully against her chest. The 3 of them knelt there together on the worn rug, queen, princess, and grandchildren, while James stood watch and the honor guards averted their eyes, giving their empress the privacy for this world-altering moment. "I should have told you," Sariah said, tears streaming freely down her face now. "I know I should have. I was going to. I swear I was. I just—" Her voice failed her. "You were afraid," Thera finished for her, pulling back to look at her daughter. She saw the ghost of the grieving girl she had last seen 5 years ago, but she also saw a strength, a resilience, a joy that had been absent then. "Afraid I would take them from you. Claim them for the Empire. Their children, Mother," Sariah's voice turned fierce, protective. "They should get to be children. Not heirs, not political assets. Just children who play in the dirt and break vases and believe that kitchen chairs are the finest climbing equipment in the galaxy." Her grip tightened around Mira. "I wanted them to have what I never did. A normal childhood. Time to be themselves before the weight of the Empire ever touches them." Thera thought of her own childhood, raised from birth for the throne. Of Sariah's upbringing, every moment scheduled, every friendship vetted, every interest weighed for its political value. She thought of 300 years of bearing the weight of civilization, of duty before desire, of the crown always, always coming first. She looked at Lyra, at the trust in her violet eyes. She looked at Cale, peeking at her from behind James's leg, his earlier defiance replaced by a cautious curiosity. She looked at the infant, Mira, sleeping through this seismic shift in their family's history. "You gave them what you never had," Thera said slowly, the truth of it settling deep in her bones. "What I never had." She looked at her daughter, her vision blurring. "You gave them a family." "That's all I ever wanted," Sariah whispered. For them. And for myself. Can you understand that? As if in answer, Mira chose that moment to wake. Her tiny face scrunched up, and she let out a wail of protest that was astonishingly loud for such a small creature. Sariah adjusted her automatically, beginning to rock and soothe her. Thera watched her daughter comfort her granddaughter, and the last remnants of her anger dissolved, replaced by something more complex, more profound. Awe, humility, and a love so vast it threatened to overwhelm her. I understand, she said finally. And I am sorry, so truly sorry, that you felt you could not trust me with this. It wasn't about trust. Yes, Thera interrupted gently. It was. And I earned that doubt. With my focus on the Empire, on duty, I made you feel that your personal happiness was secondary. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and touched Mira's tiny, perfect hand. The baby's fingers instinctively curled around her thumb, a grip of surprising strength. But I am here now. And I am not leaving until I know everything. Every moment I missed. Every detail. All of it. Blank. Blank. Thera sent her honor guards back to orbit with instructions that bordered on royal decree. No interruptions. No diplomatic emergencies. Nothing short of a galaxy-ending cataclysm was to disturb her, and even then, they were to consider handling it themselves. Your Majesty, her captain had protested, the treaty negotiations on the frontier. Can wait, Thera said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Tell them the Queen is indisposed. Tell them I've contracted some mysterious frontier illness. Tell them whatever you like, but I am not leaving this colony for at least 3 days. Is that understood? Now, she sat cross-legged on the floor of her daughter's modest home, building blocks scattered around her like the ruins of a miniature city, while Kale explained the intricate, nonsensical rules of his tower-building game. Apparently, purple blocks could only touch blue ones, and green blocks were sleeping, and couldn't be used until someone made a specific wake-up noise. Like this, Kyle demonstrated, producing a sound that was part rooster crow, part malfunctioning engine. Now the green ones can play. I see, Thera said, her face serious. That's very logical. She placed a green block with exaggerated care, then watched her grandson immediately knock the entire structure down with a cry of gleeful triumph. Again, he shouted. Lyra appeared at her elbow, a picture book about a space explorer clutched in both hands. Can you read to me? Mama says you're very smart, so you probably read good. Read well, Thera corrected automatically, then caught herself. The Empress was speaking. She took a breath. The grandmother needed to learn a new language. But yes, I would love to read to you. The book was well worn, its pages soft at the edges. Lyra snuggled against Thera's side, her small body warm and trusting, pointing at pictures and asking questions that ranged from startlingly insightful to wonderfully absurd. Halfway through, Kale abandoned his blocks to join them, climbing into Thera's lap with the unthinking confidence of a child who had never learned to fear authority. In the kitchen, Sariah and James spoke in low tones, their conversation a soft murmur beneath the children's chatter. Thera caught fragments. Discussions about how to announce this to the Empire. Concerns about media attention. The logistics of maintaining the children's privacy. They were important matters, things she knew she would have to address with all the power and resources at her disposal. But not yet. Not now. When Mira was a warm, sleeping weight in her arms, her tiny breaths a soft puff against Thera's neck. "She likes you," Lyra observed, watching her grandmother hold the baby. "Usually she cries when new people hold her." "Perhaps she knows I'm family," Thera murmured. "Do you really rule a whole empire?" Cale asked, his eyes wide. "Like all the planets?" "Many of them, yes." "That's a lot of planets." "Do you have a spaceship?" "A big one." "Several, actually." "Can we see them?" Both children looked at her with identical, hopeful expressions that made refusing an impossibility. "Someday," she promised, "I will take you on a tour of the finest ships in the Imperial fleet. But right now, I think your mother needs you to help set the table for dinner." Dinner was a beautiful, chaotic affair. Mira woke and needed feeding. Cale spilled his juice twice. Lyra insisted on telling a long, convoluted story about an incident at the colony's school that involved a friend, a escaped pet, and a misunderstanding about edible fungus that Thera couldn't quite follow, but that everyone else found uproariously funny. The table was too small for 5 adults and 3 children, so they crowded together, elbows bumping, passing dishes in a choreographed dance of domesticity that was more alien to Thera than any diplomatic banquet. This was what Sariah had chosen. Not the isolated grief Thera had imagined, but this cramped, joyful, messy, vibrant life, filled with love and laughter and the simple, profound business of being a family. After the children were finally in bed, a process that involved lengthy negotiations, 2 stories, 3 glasses of water, and several false alarms about monsters under the bed, Thera sat with Sariah and James in the small living room. The adults, at last, had the space to address the complicated new reality they found themselves in. "The Empire will want to know about them," Thera said quietly, cradling a cup of the local herbal tea Sarah had brought over. "I can delay the announcement for a little while, but not indefinitely. 3 heirs to the throne. They don't stay a secret for long." "I know," Sariah said, twisting her ironwood wedding band around her finger. "I've been thinking about this for years. How to protect them, while still acknowledging what they represent. What if they're not heirs?" James suggested. Both women turned to look at him. "Hear me out," he said, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "Sariah, you are still the heir apparent. When the time comes, and I pray to every god I've ever heard of that it's centuries from now, you will take the throne. But the children, what if they're allowed to choose their own paths? Lyra might want to rule someday, or she might want to be a botanist or a starship pilot or anything else. Why saddle them with that decision before they're even old enough to understand what it means?" "The succession laws," Thera began, "can be changed," James finished. "You're the queen. If you declare that succession will be determined by choice, by readiness, by merit, rather than simple birth order. Who is going to argue with you? Give them what Sariah wanted for them. Time to be children. Time to discover who they are before the Empire tells them who they have to be. Thera looked at her daughter. Is this what you want? Yes. Sariah's voice was firm, her gaze steady. More than anything, I want them to have choices, Mother. All the choices I never had. Thera felt the weight of the decision settle into her, not as a burden, but as a foundation. It felt right. It felt true. Then we will make it so, she said. I will draft new succession protocols. We will announce the children's existence to the Empire, but we will make it clear that they are not immediate heirs. They will be given privacy, protection, and, above all, time. And visitation rights for grandmothers. Sariah asked, a tentative, hopeful smile touching her lips. Extensive visitation rights, Thera affirmed, a matching smile breaking through her own regal composure. I have missed 5 years. I intend to be aggressively present for the next 500. She reached across the space between them and took her daughter's hand. If you'll let me. I never wanted to shut you out, Mother, Sariah said, her fingers tightening around Thera's. I just needed to find myself first. To be Sariah, before I could be Princess Sariah again. And did you? Thera asked softly. Did you find yourself? Sariah looked around the small, cluttered, love-filled room. At the toys on the floor, the drawings on the wall, at James watching her with unwavering devotion in his eyes. She looked back at her mother, her own eyes clear and certain. I found more than myself, she said. I found everything I didn't know I could have. Blank, blank. The next morning, Thera sat in the garden, the red dirt staining the knees of her expensive trousers, while Lyra instructed her on the proper way to water plants. According to her granddaughter, you couldn't just pour the water. You had to talk to the plants while you did it, telling them they were doing a good job growing. Does that actually help them? Thera asked, genuinely curious. Papa says plants like encouragement, Lyra stated with the absolute authority of a 5-year-old. And Papa knows everything about plants. He certainly knows more than your mother did when she first arrived, Thera said, a real, unforced laugh bubbling up in her chest. Lyra giggled. Mama killed a lot of plants. Papa says it was plant murder, but Mama says it was learning. Kale ran past, a whirlwind of energy, chasing some invisible prey and making spirited laser noises. From inside the house, Thera could hear Sariah singing to Mira, a lullaby that was half an ancient Celestine melody, half a Terran folk song James had taught her. 300 years. The number echoed in her mind again, but this time it was different. 3 centuries of rule. 300 years of decisions that shaped worlds, of sacrifices made for the greater good, of duty placed above everything else. She had thought she understood what mattered: empire, stability, legacy. But sitting here in the sun, the dirt under her fingernails, listening to her grandchildren's laughter and her daughter's voice weaving 2 cultures into one song, she realized, with a clarity that was as humbling as it was joyful, that she had been measuring the wrong things all along. Grandmother. Lyra tugged on her sleeve. Why are you crying again? Are the plants making you sad? Thera looked down at the child, at the silver hair and violet eyes that were the living proof of a miracle, and she pulled her into a tight embrace. No, little star, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I'm not sad, I'm happy. Sometimes people cry when they're very, very happy. Lyra pulled back, her small face scrunched in thought. That's confusing. Yes, Thera agreed, kissing her granddaughter's forehead. But it's also wonderful. Blank, underscore, blank. Before she left to finally attend to the long-delayed treaty negotiations, Thera held each of her grandchildren and made promises she intended to keep with the same ferocity with which she defended her empire. Regular visits. Gifts sent from across the stars. Stories of every world she had ever seen. She promised Sariah that nothing would change for their family unless they wanted it to, that her daughter's hard-won happiness would be protected at all costs. As her ship lifted from the dusty landing pad of New Horizon, Thera looked down at the small, unassuming dwelling that now held the center of her universe. Somewhere inside that house, 3 children played, utterly unaware that their existence had just quietly, irrevocably, rewritten the future of an empire. Their mother watched over them with a heart full of joy instead of grief. Their father loved them and kept them safe. And their grandmother, Queen Thera of the Celestine Empire, sovereign of 200 worlds, carried the sound of their laughter back to the stars, a treasure more precious than any throne, more powerful than any fleet, and more enduring than any legacy built of cold stone and colder politics. It was the sound of a future she had never dared to hope for, and it was the only legacy that truly mattered.